for other students to come in, we can just talk about the new topic, okay? In a selected topic in international finance, okay? The topic that I want to introduce you is effective exchange rate, okay? And the short is the short for EER, okay? And basically, it's a measure of the weighted average value of a currency relative to a selected group of currencies, okay? That's because when we try to understand or measure the value of Taiwanese currency versus other currencies, we have to have a group or basket of the currencies, okay? Because in the war, there will be like more than 200, currencies or more, right? So because it will take a lot of time, and it's quite time consuming to calculate all those 200 plus currencies. So that's why we should select a basket of currencies, okay? And the criteria to select the basket is according the trade relationship of those countries with Taiwan, okay? So the first criteria is to ask whether Taiwan has any trade with those, countries. And if Taiwan does, then it will be within our pool to select, okay? And of course, from the pool, we're gonna select the most close ones, okay? In terms of the trade relationship with Taiwan, okay? And how do we judge or measure the closeness of the relationship? It's by the total amount of the trade, okay? So that means the exports plus imports, okay? So then, in a sense, we will include only the most important currencies, okay? And because we're gonna use the index, so we need to have a base year that we can compare our numbers against, okay? And our base year, we normally choose a time period when there is less volatility, okay? Like more stable. For example, if we have chosen the years before the pandemic, right? Like 2018, 2019, that will be considered more stable than the years in the pandemic years, like 2021 or 2022, and so on, okay? And then we have to think about what would be the weight we can place on those currencies, okay? And of course, it will be determined by the total amount of the trade Taiwan has with those countries, okay? So the weight will place greater emphasis on more important currencies in the currency baskets, okay? So that's the step one for us to measure and understand the true value of Taiwanese currency, okay? And of course, you can apply the concept to other currencies of your interest, okay? For example, if you come from other countries, then your country's currency will be the variable of interest in this context, okay? And the next thing is to understand what does EER mean, okay? By definition, it actually provides a broader measure of a currency's value against a basket of several foreign currencies, okay? And it has two labels. The first one is called a nominal, EER, okay? Or sometimes we call it near, okay? It's not adjusted for inflation. Whereas the real one, okay? Or we call the real, adjust for inflation differences between the trading partners, indicating the real purchasing power of a country's goods and services in the international markets, okay? So as a whole, when we talk about the effective exchange rate, we actually refer to the weighted average of a country's bilateral exchange rate against the currencies of selected countries. This measures the average value of a country's currency relative to the currencies of the country's major trading partners. So if the focal is Taiwan, then we will be talking about the neighboring countries. Okay. So as I mentioned, both the nominal one and the real one will be the index. Okay. And especially for the real one, we will have to take into account the price differences of different countries, okay, that are trading with Taiwan, okay? And here are the steps to construct this measure, okay? First, we must first pick a set of currencies that we are most interested in. Next, we must assign relative weight. In the following example, we weight the currency according to the country's importance as the trading partner using the total trade volume with Taiwan. Okay. So here are the 5 steps. Okay. First, you pick a basket of currencies related to the Taiwan trade. Okay. And second, you calculate the weight of the bilateral exchange rate in the currency column, and then you select the base year, okay, which is most stable years, okay, and you can calculate the relative exchange rate, okay, and then you calculate the effective exchange rate indexed, all right. So this will be the 5 steps, okay, and let's review the basics. Okay, when we try to talk about the basket of currencies, we wonder what are those currencies related to Taiwan. Okay, so back in 2000, okay, the government they have referred to a couple of important currencies. Okay, such as the currencies from countries or regions including the United States, the Eurozone, Japan, the United Kingdom, Canada, South Korea, mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and Australia. Okay, and as you can see, not only they are geographically close to Taiwan, but they also have a lot of trade volumes with Taiwan. Okay, and the government actually updates the index in 2005, incorporating Vietnam as the 15th currency in the basket. Okay, because the closer relationship between Taiwan and Vietnam in terms of the trade, also in terms of the people visiting Vietnam and also the Vietnamese people visiting Taiwan. And so having the Vietnam in the basket is a form to reflect the trade relationship between Taiwan and the partners in terms of the trade. Okay. So in terms of the composition, if we create an effective exchange rate for the U.S. that include only Canada and Mexico, we can weight each currency using a country's share of total trade. So here we try to imagine we actually live in a world that only has 3 countries. Okay, to simplify the operation of the concept. Okay, so in this context, the share will be the exports. Okay, that we denote as X, plus the imports that we denote as M. So in such case, the Canadian weight would be the exports from the Canadian plus the imports from the Canadian divided by the export from the Canadian plus the import from the Canadian plus the exports from the Mexican plus the import from Mexico. Okay. From this, you can get a ratio. Okay, and it could be 30%, it could be 50%, and so on and so forth. Okay? And the bigger the weights, it means the bigger the trading volume between that particular country with the US. Okay? Should it be Canadian or Mexican? Now, as we talked about the nominal one before, okay, it actually measures the volume of the currency relative to a basket of other currencies weighted by the trade shares, and it's not adjusted for inflation. So here is the formula for calculating this nominal index. So we take the weight 1 times the exchange 1 plus the weight 2 times the exchange 2 and plus so many others, okay, and times 100. That's how you can measure the index, okay. So when you have a higher volume, it means a stronger domestic currency, okay. So it means the currency's value is higher than its neighboring countries, okay. And it could mean good thing or bad thing, which we will discuss in a few seconds, okay. And for the real one, okay, it actually adjusts for the relative price levels, or sometimes we call the inflation, okay, providing a better measure of the international price competitive advantage, okay. And the formula for calculating this real number is using the nominal number times the price level of the foreign currency divided by the price level of the domestic currency, okay. And now it's about time to interpret the results. So if our real number is greater than 100, it means the domestic goods are less competitive than its trading partners. Why? Because, as we mentioned earlier, when the index number goes up, it means the country really enjoy the competitive advantage. So the value is actually higher. But we know when the value of currency is higher, it actually makes its export more expensive compared to its competitors, right? For example, if we export bikes, right, to to US, we will face competitions from the bikes from South Korea, from Japan, from China, right? And so if our exports are more expensive, then it will actually make our goods less competitive. Okay, that's one. Okay, and by contrast, if the real number is less than 100, it means the domestic goods will be more competitive. Okay, and then its competitors. And for the competitive, we actually mean more or real depreciation. All right. So this is one example to show you how can you compose the index, okay, according to those 5 steps that we have mentioned, okay, using the Canadian and Mexico and also the Taiwan and Japan example, okay. So first, let's look at the rates between the U.S. and the Taiwan, okay? And let's assume the Taiwan is actually trading only with 2 countries, like U.S. and Japan, okay? Whereas the U.S. amount for 70% of the trading volume, okay? And the Japan only account for 30% of it, okay? And we take 2000 as the base year, okay? And then we can use the indirect rate in this case. That's how we can get the 0.0320, okay? And when we check the 2009 number again, the indirect rate, we can get the second number, okay? So what we need to do next is to find the relative exchange rate. That's when we divide the 2009 number with the 2000 number, okay? Then we can get 0.9218, okay? And because Japan only accounts for the 70%, so we have to multiply 0.7 to arrive at this figure, okay? All right, so we just do the same thing for the second row, okay? And that's how we can get this number. And then we just add it up, okay? And amazingly, we will get, when we add it up and times 100, we will get about 92. That's our index, okay? And remember, our index at the status quo is always 100. So it seems the value of the index kind of decrease, kind of go down, right, over time. Okay, so this means the value for Taiwan actually goes down, relative to Japan and USA. Okay, but then if you are looking from the angle of exports, this actually means our export becomes more competitive because our export becomes cheaper from Taiwan. So imagine the price tag of the Taiwan bike in the US market could be $50. At the same time, the price tag from the South Korea could be 60, and from Japan could be 70. In such a case, the Taiwanese good could be viewed as a bargain, right? And this will actually will be seen more attractive to customers and consumers as a whole. Okay. Now I'm gonna show you the implication of the level and the movement of the real effective exchange rate index. So as we mentioned, we have a couple of situations. The first one is when it's greater than 100. Okay. So this happens when the country's currency price level is higher than the base year. Okay, and this also means that external price competitiveness of the product will be lower than the base period. Okay, and when the index is less than 100, okay, this means the currency's price level is lower than the base period, and the international price competitiveness of its goods is higher than the base period. Okay, so then we can see whether the number goes up or goes down. Okay, if the number goes up, this means the country's currency has effectively appreciated in the real term. Okay, means the value of Taiwanese currency goes up. Okay, but is that a real good thing? Okay, then you can take the angle from the export. If Taiwanese good becomes more expensive than the products from Japan, South Korea, how good could that be, right, for the Taiwanese exports, right? And if the impact is negative, it's more adverse, then what could happen to Taiwan's GDP, economic growth, right, in the aftermath? Okay. All right, so this graph shows you what happened between 2005 and 2024 in terms of nominal index, in terms of the real GDP, right? The real index, right? And as we mentioned before, Taiwan is an export-oriented country, right? So when the export becomes cheaper, it actually boosts its exports and actually enhance its GDP growth, right? So if I could get your attention to the pink line here, right? So it seems like the pink line is going down, from its peak in 2005 all the way to 2023, right? So this one shows the value of Taiwanese currency actually depreciate over time. Okay, so you could think whether that is actually a good thing or bad thing for Taiwan, right? Because on one hand, the Taiwan currency you hold may not be that high net wealth that you can actually convert into much more Japanese yen for your spending or consuming in Japan markets, right? But then when the Taiwanese good becomes more, less expensive, right? And this will actually help Taiwan's exports, right? And that will be consistent with the goal, right, of the Taiwan's export-oriented, goal to increase its export to many other countries. Okay. All right. So this here it just show you the second example, right? So let's assume we have the Canada, US, Mexico, and UK. Okay. And then in such case, the Canada account for 50% of the trade, Mexico account for 30% of the trade, and UK account for 20% of the trade. Okay, and the total will be 100 for sure. Okay, so these numbers will constitute our weights, right? 50, 30, and 20. Now let's consider the following exchange rate data. So we have the Canadian, we have the Mexico, we have the British pound, right? And we have these three numbers in 2 years, in 2003 and 2004, right? So with those 6 numbers, we can easily measure the nominal index value and also the real index value, right, for the effective exchange rate. So as we mentioned earlier, the ER is calculated by summing the weighted value, right, of the current period rate relative to the base year rate. So the weighted average value is calculated as the summation of the weight 1 times the currency exchange rate I divided by the base exchange value I, right, which we have demonstrated with tables, right, before this. And we can commonly sum this and then multiply by 100 to express the real, to express the effective exchange rate on the 100 basis, right? And then we will see in a few seconds that the base year value of the index will be 100 in this case, okay? And the index is very useful to show the changes in the weighted average value from one period to the other. Okay? So let's assume 2003 is our base year. Okay? So let's go through the steps of the calculation. Okay? So step 1, you have to use the formula that was mentioned, right? You can use the index divided by the base year index and times the weight, which is 50. And then you do the same thing for the second term and the same thing for the third term, and you multiply by 100. Then you get the number 100, right? So that's your index value for the base year, okay? All right, the second year. So we just calculated the value for the base year. Now let's try for the subsequent year, 2004, okay? Again, we put in the numbers from the table, the 6 numbers, right? And then just plug in the numbers, and then the weight will keep the same, right? And then we times 100, so we can get the index number, it becomes 96, right? So compared to the base year of 100, it seems like the index number goes down, right? So the dollar therefore has experienced about a 4% depreciation in the weighted value, okay? Because 100 minus 96 will give you about 4% decline. Right? All right, so an effective exchange rate based on the real exchange rate as opposed to the nominal exchange rate. Okay, so that's what we learned before. And when it comes to the price level, we can use the consumer price index number as a measure of our price level index, right? And then that's how we can convert the nominal exchange rate to the real rate to construct the index itself. Okay. So to sum up with our lesson, okay. So the question is, how is general value of currency measured? Okay, we know an effective exchange rate tracks the movement of a currency against a number of currencies, right? And of course, we will focus on the currencies that has that's coming from the countries that has good relationship in terms of trade with Taiwan. Okay, and because an effective exchange rate is weighted average of a set of bilateral exchange rate, it is very useful as a general guide to changes in the currency's value. Okay? And a real effective exchange rate is measured based on the real bilateral exchange rate, whereas the nominal effective exchange rate is based on the nominal bilateral exchange rate without considering the price levels. Okay? So from this lesson, we know an economic approach to measure the value of a currency that you are interested in. It could be Taiwanese dollar, right? It could be the Japanese yen. It could be the British pound.
British pound and euro.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how you know whether the value of the currency you are concerned goes up or go down. There must be approach, and this is the standard approach to measure that. Okay. All right. So the next one we're gonna talk about is, in a layman's term, is investment strategies that you can use in the foreign exchange markets. Okay. And the formal terminology is called a foreign exchange arbitrage. Okay. So this refers to a strategy used by traders to profit from the price differences or the price discrepancies in different markets. For example, a trader can buy the currency at a lower price in one market and then sell it at a higher price in another, right? And then can pocket the profits, right? So the basic the mechanics of the arbitrage would be, first, you have to identify whether there's any price differences, right? And it could be the difference between the listed price and the price that you are willing or average person are willing to purchase, right? Or it could be the price that's available on the market, right, versus the implied price, right? And you can derive the implied price based on the formulas, right, or other approaches that you see that you deem appropriate, right? And then you can go on to the second step. You buy a currency where it is undervalued, right? And this would be your judgment call, right? And sometimes you can have more objective measure using formulas. Right? Second, you can sell the currency where it is overvalued. Okay? So let's look at some example, right? So let's say the euro right now is trading at 1.45 US dollars, right, in New York markets, right? And the same euro is trading at 1.49 USD, right, in the London market, right? So when you compare these two numbers, right, which one is higher? Will be this number, right? So this means the euro, right, is more expensive in London markets, right? So by contrast, the euro is cheaper in New York. Now you know where the euro is undervalued and where the euro is overvalued, right? And then you can see there's a price difference, right? When you see 1.45 and 1.49, there is clearly a number difference, right? And then you can think about how can you pocket the profit, right? So it seems like there exists an arbitrage opportunity for you, right, as a trader. So you could buy the euro in New York at 1.45, right, USD, and then you sell the same euro in London at 1.49 USD. Then, if I done the mathematically correctly, then I should have 4 penny USD per euro profit, ignoring the transaction cost. Okay? Now, that's my concept, that's my theory, right? So, let's assume I have, so that's the idea, right? We can take that and just go further with it, right? So, in summary, we have this kind of strategy that means you can buy low and sell high, right? And this also is an activity that individual can seek immediate profit based on the price differentials. Right? And here, I'm trying to introduce two concepts, two strategies, two arbitrage. Okay? One is called the spatial arbitrage. Okay? This refers to the act of profiting from the exchange rate differences that prevail in different markets. Right? The example I just showed you, we have the London markets, we have the New York markets. Yeah, this is the perfect example for the spatial arbitrage. And the spatial by definition means the space, right? So if you have the same goods, they have different value in different places, then you can bring the goods from the undervalued place and to the place that's overvalued and sell them. That's how you can get a profit, right? And the more you do that, the more profit in the absolute term you get, right? So that's a good thing, right? And the second investment strategy is called the triangular strategy. Okay, so this means that you have more than two markets, or you have more than two, currencies, right? So for example, you have three transactions undertaken in three different markets and or in three different currencies in order to profit from the differences in prices. Okay. All right. So to help you to recap what we have just discussed, right? So here's the question, right, for you to think about it. So what is foreign exchange arbitrage? Okay. So the foreign exchange for arbitrage is the act of buying a currency at one price and immediately sell it at a different price. Okay? And when it comes to the spatial arbitrage, it refers to the arbitrage activity that spans separate markets. You have two different markets, geographic. Okay? And for the triangular arbitrage, it refers to the arbitrage activities in which the foreign exchange transaction involve more than two currencies. Right? So if you have the euro, the USD, and also the Japanese yen, when you have three currencies and you try to profit among two or three markets, then you are using the triangular arbitrage. Okay. Alright, so the spatial arbitrage refers to the buying the currency in one market and sell it in another. Okay, so the price differences arise from the geographic dispersed markets, which could happen, right? Because people value things differently, right? And due to the low-cost, rapid information nature of the foreign exchange market, these price differences will be arbitraged away quickly. Okay, so sometimes you hear economists says that there is no free lunch. There is no money on the street for you to pick. Okay? But then there could be another reality to that, right? For example, there could be money on the street, but someone saw the money first, maybe 1 hour before you. And the person just picked the money away. That's why you don't, see the money. But when you don't see the money, doesn't mean the money was not there. Maybe the money was there. Maybe
asymmetric information.
Exactly. Maybe you need to act more quickly, right, for you to see the money, right? And that's the reality, and that's also why people start using computers when they are doing trading. Maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Because they think for the humans to act on the opportunity could be a little bit slow, right? Especially when across the globe there are like millions of traders, right? They are thinking at the same time whether to buy Apple stock or not, right? So you have to act quickly when there are opportunities, right? So people use computers to solve the issue that it takes time for human to think, right? And to make the decisions. So so this kind of spatial arbitrage refers to the trading activity of buying low and selling high by taking advantages of differences in exchange rate of two currencies in different markets. Okay. Now let's apply the concept that we talked about before, right? We have the euro trading in the New York markets and also in the London markets, right? Now, let's say at the same time, the 1 euro can be exchanged for 1.45 USD in New York, while it can be exchanged for 1.49 USD in the London markets, right? So we know which one is cheaper, right? The euro is cheaper in New York. Now, let's say a trader can buy 1 million euro in London, right? That's where the euro is undervalued, right? And for 1.45 USD and immediately sell that in London for 1.49 million USD, right? So without considering the transaction cost, the trader will earn about 4 penny USD per euro, right? So this will actually result in a profit about 40,000 USD, right? Which will be the 4 penny times the 1 million, which is your principal, right? So this will easily give you the return of 4% in one transaction, okay? And if you want to have more profits in a dollar amount or in the absolute value, then you just have to do more trade, right? All right, so we have talked about, so that's the typical example for the spatial arbitrage, right? All right, so here are just some more examples to that. Okay, and let's try to get into the second investment strategy. Okay, so the second one is called the triangular arbitrage. Okay, it involves a third currency or or markets. So the arbitrage in this context, the opportunity exists if an observed rate in another market is not consistent with the cross rate. Okay, remember the cross rate? Something about implied points, right? We can infer from different exchange rates, right? Now again, if we see there is a difference, the price difference between the table rate and also the implied rate, it means there could be opportunities, right? And again, the profit opportunities are likely to be arbitraged away quickly, meaning that